Let me see. I don't know, maybe but I don't know how to do that. I know there's a way in Zoom to put like a screen behind me, but I don't know how to do that.
Fahad, maybe my colleague Fahad would be able to help with this. And then also maybe if you have slides and you'd like to test sharing them, we can do
Oh
that.
yeah,
We have 15
let me
minutes.
do that. Yeah, send request. Yeah, I already sent the request to share my presentation.
Okay.
Okay, let me see. Uh-huh.
Fahad, إذا ممكن if Dr. Christina, oh yes, great, thank you.
So can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it, but if you could just go into presentation mode so we can
Yeah.
see if we can get it full screen. Yes, perfect.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Let me see how I can move through it.
No, sí, gracias por avisarme.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. So I will take it out now. I stop sharing and I'll share when my turn comes. Okay, great. Now let me see what I can do for my image.
There may be a way, kind of in the icons to have a background, but we can see you clearly. It's just there's a bit of light behind you, but I don't think
Okay.
it really affects it much if you aren't able to find the
Okay.
the
Good.
screen.
That's good to know. I will try to find the way, but if I don't, I'm okay with if you can see me properly, it's okay.
Yes, yeah, we can see you properly.
Great. Oh. No, I think I go with a none.
It's the season for it, so it might be appropriate.
We'll leave it this way.
And how has your work been, Christina, with the chair? I mean, we met really early on when we first started the chair here at the center. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited to know more about your work and what you've been doing with the chair.
Yes, in fact, I decided at the last minute after hearing to the presentation, yesterday's presentation, to speak about another project that we worked on during the last 2 years, which was we worked with UNESCO for the publication called Celebrating the Living Heritage of Indigenous Peoples. So it was really a challenge in terms of language and translation and respecting the ways of on how the ways people express themselves and basically taking into consideration that language is much more than words, but are the reflection of worldviews. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this project, which was really interesting and challenging. So we've been working on that, and we've been working. Well, now we are closing several research projects that had been ongoing for several years. So this year is more like the last semester of last year, and the first semester of this one is a time for settling pending issues, and then starting a new project with which I think is going to be. Well, we're discussing currently because we want to focus on concrete case studies that address the relationship between living heritage and sustainable development but from a very community-based perspective. So we're discussing if we maybe gonna do that through foodways or culinary traditions, or we don't know yet. Probably it's going to be on that avenue.
That sounds
So we're
great.
really
Excited to kind of learn more about these projects and collaborate more. I think there's a lot of overlap, I think, between our projects.
I do think so.
Virginia and ours. I think it's really exciting to have these conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
مرحبا دكتورة ضياء ومرحبا دكتور أسامة.
السلام عليكم، مرحبا بكم.
مرحبا، يعطيك العافية. هلا مرحبا
إن شاء الله
دكتورة.
تكون كلكم أموركم
أهلا
بخير.
وسهلا.
أهلا وسهلا فيكم.
سعيد بأن أكون معكم اليوم. تحياتي.
حياك الله دكتور.
So how about you? How have your work been progressing?
It's been a very productive first year for the chair. I mean, we still, I think, the projects that we worked on the first year, we still haven't published any of our findings, but I think kind of we're ready to get to that stage. We've been working. We had a few grants for last year, early scholar grants, which we're working on publishing. We have our edited volume on rethinking translating culture, which we're working on now. And that's all kind of the culmination of a year's work with the Translating Cultures Lab, which is really kind of the cornerstone of, I think, the chair as of now. It's kind of an interdisciplinary group of scholars from around the world who really meet to kind of develop theoretical frameworks and approaches to the questions that we're interested in at the chair, and it's been really great seeing that that kind of project and that group evolve, and it's always great to have these interdisciplinary discussions around kind of specific research questions. And so we have kind of a new some of the members of the TCL are staying on for the next year, but we have also new members coming in with different interests, people who are interested in artificial intelligence and translation, things like that. So kind of it's a really great project that we've been working on, and a lot of the products of the chair kind of stem from that lab.
Wow, it's amazing. I think that the lab format is so productive and creative in the sense that you can explore and just try new things and new ideas and let things flow in a more flexible way.
Yes, exactly. And it's really great also because obviously we hold it virtually, and we really have kind of just organizing the meeting based on the different time zones is quite exhausting, because we really have people from around the world, and I'm sure you know about this as well. Really great to have different perspectives from different institutions, different schools of thought, different fields, different disciplines. So it's been a very enlightening kind of project.
Wow. I'm so glad that it's flowing and producing things. I'm eager to be able to know more about the results you've been having.
Definitely, we'll be in touch with kind of our products. We also thank you for also sending us the material for the final reports to the UNESCO. We also prepared our own report.
Oh, great!
So we'll definitely send that to you, so you can kind of see what we've been doing for the first year of the tenure.
Great. In fact, I am now in the process also of renewing the chair, because it was renewed last on 2023, by the end of 2023. But since we were behind in asking for that renewal period, now we have to do it again in order to be renewed by mid 2025. So we're in the process of also writing the report.
Okay. I think
I will
we'll
share it with you also.
that would be great. We'd love to see, and I think we'll get some advice from you when we get to also the renewal process.
Great, of course. Gladly.
Professor Sadana, nice to see you.
Indeed. Nice to see you too. So was it, I thought the yesterday's meeting was very interesting.
It really was a great meeting. We were just speaking about it.
Yeah.
I think there are also lots of different directions I think we can take these the kind of when thinking about outcomes for this workshop, it really opens up lots of different questions and different directions. So it was really, really productive, I think, and really thought-provoking.
Yes. And some wonderful case studies and actually things that people have done. And yeah. Lots of issues that exist in different locations in different forms, but they are essentially very similar issues as concerning oral narratives and performers and their lives.
Yes, and it brings up so much opportunity, I think, for comparative studies, which I think was already kind of a thought that was going around yesterday, I think, when Ryan mentioned kind of the importance of studies in South Asia to studies in North Africa. And I think those links were already just made off the cuff during the workshop, which could be
Yes.
kind of further developed.
I'm indeed very happy to be part of this and to be listening to such wonderful research from different locations. It's amazing.
We're very happy to have you as well. Thank you for your great presentation yesterday.
Thank you.
I think we just have 3 minutes before we go live, and Dr. Munira should join any minute now.
Morning.
Good morning, Ryan. How are you? I think you're muted. I think we may wait 2 minutes before we start.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
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 Good
السلام
evening.
عليكم.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
Walaikum salam.
عليكم السلام سعادة الدكتورة.
أهلا وسهلا دكتور ضياء حياك الله. It seems to me people are still joining. Good evening. We can start because I don't want to delay you. Welcome back to Translating Oral Traditions and the Safeguarding of Cultural Heritage, an initiative of the UNESCO Chair in Translating Cultures. I am Munira Al-Ghadir, and I'm delighted to reconvene our workshop and the second session this evening. Interpretation is available. To access it, please select either Arabic or English. الترجمة الفورية متاحة وبإمكانكم اختيار اللغة المطلوبة. The UNESCO Chair in Translating Cultures inaugurated in October 2023 with the support of the Literature Publishing and Translation Commission promotes a more inclusive and diverse approach to translation studies with a focus on Arabic and Middle Eastern perspectives and South-South collaboration. Before we begin our session, if you allow me, I would like to just give a recap of yesterday's session. Yesterday's discussion highlighted the importance of oral tradition, preserving cultural heritage, and the crucial role of translation in the creative and methodological approaches to interpreting and transferring oral texts and performances. I would like to thank Professor Francesca Orsini for her brilliant moderation, insightful intervention, and diligent timekeeping. I would like also to thank the UNESCO chairs, the Heritage Commission, all of our presenters, and our team at King Faisal Center. The presentations were both informative and inspiring, generating a central theme: the innovative exploration and reimagining of cultural heritage and traditional practices through creative expression in contemporary context. In a case study presentation, Professor Lourdes explored the creation of promotional material for UNESCO World Heritage Sites, demonstrating how heritage and personal stories can bridge generational and cultural divides and foster understanding. The Heritage Commission's presentation by Ibtisam Al-Huwaibi and Haifa Al-Hamidan on Nabati poetry and the efforts towards its UNESCO inscription emphasized the enduring vitality of this art form. Furthermore, they explored the importance of documenting, safeguarding, and more importantly, practicing Nabati poetry, underscoring its definition, forms, and variation in different regions of Saudi Arabia. Judith Kerr research, which reimagines the reconstruction of family history by transforming oral narrative in bilingual poetry, offered an insightful analysis of how creative and linguistic processes can critically engage with the past. It deconstructs traditional methodologies through notions like transduction, which I find it fascinating, and anti-nostalgia, utilizing them as an anti-archive, and these are her terms, to destabilize presupposed cultural frameworks. Sadana Netanyani's overview of folklorists and the concept of cultural translation provided a theoretical framework for understanding the global transmission and travel of folklore. And indeed, it travels. Here we are gathering as a testimony of that, especially within shared tradition like the Indo-Arabic and Indo-Persian heritage. Finally, Milov Cordoba, inspiring presentation on the virtually extinct Moroccan halaqa and its potential as a model for reconceptualizing traditional storytellers as translators, provided a pragmatic framework for understanding the ethical and aesthetic implications of labor for such figures globally. These presentations have laid the groundwork for sustained future collaboration, which we can discuss as part of this workshop's outcomes. Another outcome of this workshop, which I really would like to highlight and share with you this evening, is the chair's Early Scholars Publications Grant, supporting the publication of outstanding PhD dissertations that critically examine contemporary debates related to the workshop's theme. We look forward to collaborating with the UNESCO chairs, the Heritage Commission, and all of you as we develop this discussion and jointly decide on research outcomes. This evening, we will build on the first session's insights delving into a range of critical topics related to preserving and translating oral traditions. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Professor Dawn Shati, who will be chairing this session. Professor Shati is a distinguished social anthropologist specializing in the Middle East, particularly nomadic, pastoral tribes, and refugee youth. Her extensive research explores forced migration and development issues, including conservations in induced displacement, tribal resettlement, technology's impact, gender, and the effect of conflict in young refugees. With a background spanning academia and development practice, including work with international organizations, and having served as the director of the Refugee Studies Center at the University of Oxford, Professor Shati brings a wealth of expertise to our discussion. We are honored to have you here with us. I will hand it over to you, Professor Shati, and I look forward to another stimulating session this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munira, for that lovely introduction. Let me just say a few comments before we move directly into our presentations today. Sometimes when we are talking about oral traditions, the traditions can be painful. And here what I'm thinking about is the remarkable recording of the Armenian survivors of the Armenian genocide from 1915-1923, which have been recorded, and many of them are in large archives in Canada and in the United States. And more recently, of course, there are the recordings of the oral histories of Palestinians from their villages from 1948. These are now also audiovisual and just audio archives that are being held at the American University of Beirut. And I believe the Ford Foundation is also trying to find ways of creating digital access to these wonderful resources. These are, in fact, resources that are reminding individuals of their past, of their heritage, of their villages, of the wells that are important to their families, and so on. And I think this heritage is extremely important, but we also have, in terms of intangible heritage, other things to think about. I was mentioning a bit earlier, certainly before the Assad government in Syria, the educational curriculum included the requirement to memorize the 7 mu'allaqat, the poems of the Jahiliyyah. So this was also a reflection on memorizing and understanding the morality of Arab culture and its heritage, so that these oral traditions can go back for centuries and are very important for us to record. I think also within this notion of intangible heritage, I don't know whether we'll touch on it today, but maybe it is something we can discuss at some further point, the relationship of people to nature and to animals. And here you have, songs for animals, to bring them to feed, to bring them to drop their milk, to rejoin the group. And this, I think, also is a very important element of the intangible heritage that we need to consider. I know that we are a little bit late in terms of starting our program, so I'm going to turn over to our first speaker today, and that is Dr. Cristina Amuesca Chavez, who is going to be speaking. The title of her talk is Lost or Recognized in Translation, Possibilities and Challenges of Intercultural Dialogues for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. You have 10 to 12 minutes. I'll give you a reminder after 10 minutes, and so that gives you a chance to wrap up, and then we'll have a good opportunity for our Q&A. So over to you, Dr. Cristina.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Chatti. Thank you very much, Munira Al-Gader, and all the people at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. It is a real honor for me to be here today with you. And well, since we have a time limit, I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. I just want to say that after listening I was able to listen to the first part of yesterday's session, and after that I was disconnected. But I decided to slightly change the focus, not my theoretical or methodological considerations of my presentation, but the example I was going to present. So I'm gonna start by making some general comments, and then I go to the example I want to present for us to discuss later, hopefully. So I think it's very important to remember that the orality plays an important role in the transmission and safeguarding of living heritage, because its viability and vitality can only be ensured through transmission. And traditionally, transmission of ICH has been done orally, but also there are other systems of transmissions. So we have the oral system, an embodied system through which knowledges and traditions are shared through the body and through performances, and the written system of transmission. Of course, as we all know, there are threats to these to the oral transmission practices. Some of them are social and demographic changes that are leading, and currently more and more, to migration, urbanization, which has reduced the intergenerational contact between people and young people and their elders. Also, the formal educational systems had sometimes and in some places led to a devalorization of traditional knowledge, and the influence of mass media, which can tend to disseminate homogenizing discourses. So all that constitute threats for the transmission of ICH, particularly in its oral form. So how can we start to think, how can we safeguard oral traditions in the contemporary world? Well, in the first place, I think we need to ensure the viability and vitality of traditional contexts for oral exchange. It's not the oral exchange in itself, but the context in which knowledge and beliefs and worldviews are shared. We also need to find creative ways to promote new spaces for oral exchanges. And I'm thinking here of all the possibilities of virtual communications and spaces such as this one, and others that I'm going to address in my presentation. And also work towards new valorization forms of both ICH in general and specifically of oral transmission processes. So I just want to point that although written transmission has been thought as the cornerstone for transmission throughout time, listening practices, talking and listening practices, have been at the center of several of the transmission of several practices. And nowadays, listening is becoming more and more widespread among young generation, which I think constitutes a great opportunity for us to imagine new ways to create new contexts for transmission. So I'm going to focus on language diversity and intercultural dialogue in a global world, and how that can mean that we can get lost or we can recognize ourselves in translation. And I'm going to focus on the example of the recent publication we did, a team that I had the honor to lead, did with UNESCO, which was aimed at celebrating the living heritage of indigenous peoples in the framework of the 20th anniversary of the 2003 convention. So this was a very challenging project, because we had to gather the experiences of 8 indigenous groups all over the world. And we wanted to do that respecting their experiences and their way of expressing their ideas and the way they felt around the elements they had inscribed in the list, in the UNESCO lists, and how the safeguarding had gone in each and every case. So we designed a methodology. I will talk about that later, but we were a team of 8 people, multidisciplinary and multicultural, although all of us were mainly Spanish-speaking persons. But we designed a methodology following three principles. First, we wanted to respect self-representation, and we didn't want to talk about indigenous peoples and their experiences, but we wanted to talk with them, and we wanted for them to talk. So we decided to respect self-representation, to foster intercultural dialogue by engaging in a meaningful intercultural exchanges where their views could be understood by us, and where we were mostly going beyond the traditional ethnographic methodology of interviewing. We wanted to really be able to engage in meaningful dialogues. And we wanted to respect the plural realities and worldviews of all these indigenous groups, and their internal conflicts or disagreements. If those were to emerge, we hope to be able to convey also that. So all the chapters in this book that portray the 8 case studies we addressed are in fact co-authored between us as a facilitating group and all the stakeholders with which we exchange. So first, we wanted, what we did, the step-by-step pathway, was first to understand the communities, to document ourselves and have as much information as we could gather. Then we contacted key persons that we call cultural translators to request contact and permission to exchange with each and every one of the 8 communities. Then this project was done all online, which was a huge challenge in itself. So we organized several formats of online dialogue sessions, which had to transit between multiple translations, as I will show in a minute. Then, as a facilitating team, we did the drafting of the chapters, and we gave back the text to the people we work with, so they could collectively read them and comment on the text. So in order to make sure that we were really portraying what they wanted to convey. And after that, the texts were sent back to UNESCO for a final editing process. So here is the team, the facilitating team, and the languages we speak. And then, well, the first chapter goes around the Garifuna people. And so we had to go from Spanish, with most of the Garifuna speak Spanish and also Garifuna, but the person in charge of this case was a Garifuna person, so he could speak Garifuna directly with the other members of the communities. Then he wrote the text in English. Then he translated it into Spanish and Garifuna for the stakeholders to read it, and then it got back translated into English. That process we did with all the 8 cases. In some of them, it was easier. In other, it was really complicated. So, for example, for the polyphonic singing of the Aka, we worked first in French. Then we had a cultural translator that helped us communicate in their language, the Aka language. Then this cultural translator gave us back the French version. Then we wrote the English version. We retranslated it into French and then into Aka, so the people from the communities could read it, and then back again to French, and then English for the final editing for UNESCO. In the case of the Totonac people, all of them speak Spanish and Totonac, which made it easier for us to work with. But the person in charge of this case was only a Spanish speaker. So we had to work together between the team to get the English version for UNESCO, then back to Spanish for the Totonac, and back in English. For the Enawenawe in Brazil, we work with a mixture of Spanish and with what we call Portuñol, which is Spanish and Portuguese, because neither the person from the facilitating team nor the cultural interpreter knew Portuguese and Spanish, but we were able to establish communication. Then he helped us to translate to the Inawanawe, and then all the steps that you can see here. We also work with the Maasai, and here is how the translation and back translations process went. Then also with the Kalasha people, and that was also a very multiple translated exercise. For working with the Inuit was also easier because all of them speak English, and some of them speak Inuit, but not that many more. So they retain their cultural, yes, thank you, their cultural elements. And the Carolinian wayfinders where we had to do all these translative processes. So I'm almost finished, but I want to say that a big potential for a contemporary oral transmission in the global world are the use of communication technologies, which can allow for a more horizontal exchange of experiences. And what we have to find here is ways of translating so we can really attain a global intercultural dialogue, which of course is an ideal, but I think we can go step by step in order to get there. So I do think that translation is a tool for intercultural dialogue, but cultural translations are needed. And that means that we need to not only to translate words, but to translate worlds. And that way we can have intercultural dialogue as a way to safeguard living heritage through the expansion of oral practices. And I think that, well, I had other things to say, but I'll leave it at this for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cristina. It's always very hard to stay to 10 to 12 minutes, but I think you were able to get the main point across. I'm going to turn directly now to our next presentation by Dr. Dia El-Kaabi, who is Associate Professor of Narratives and Modern Literary Criticism at the University of Bahrain. And her presentation will be looking at oral narratives and digital cultural innovation in Gulf universities, folklore courses as a proposed cultural model. This will be in Arabic, so if you need translation, you should then make sure that you switch over to the Arabic mode. Thank you. Go ahead, please, Dr. Dia.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chati, and طبعا شكر جزيل أيضا لسعادة الأستاذة الدكتورة منيرة الغدير رئيس كرسي اليونسكو لترجمة الثقافات على هذه الفرصة الثقافية الجميلة. المقاربة هي عن المرويات الشفاهية وصناعة الابتكار الثقافي الرقمي في الجامعات الخليجية، مقررات الأدب الشعبي، فولكلور أنموذجاً ثقافياً مقترحاً. طبعاً هذه المقاربة البحثية تقترح استراتيجية ثقافية لصناعة الابتكار الثقافي وتوظيفه في مجال الحفاظ على المرويات الشفاهية والسرديات الشعبية على مستوى الجامعات والمؤسسات الأكاديمية لدول مجلس التعاون الخليجي من خلال مقررات الأدب الشعبي فولكلور. وتقترح هذه الاستراتيجية الثقافية كذلك توظيف التكنولوجيا الحديثة في رقمنة التراث وتسويقه وتحويله إلى صناعة ثقافية معرفية جاذبة في وسائط التواصل الاجتماعي، المدونات الإلكترونية، منصة إكس، الإنستغرام، الفيسبوك، سناب شات، بودكاست، يوتيوب وغيرها من أوعية تفاعلية إلكترونية، بما يحفظ هوية المرويات الشفاهية الخليجية ويساعد على استدامتها وتداولها ثقافياً وإقليمياً وعالمياً لدى الأجيال الجديدة والمستقبلية. كما تناقش هذه الاستراتيجية كيفية إنشاء قواعد البيانات الثقافية Big Data لحفظ الثقافة الشعبية الخليجية واستثمار تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي. وتقترح المقاربة أيضاً مجموعة من الوسائل الإبداعية لتوظيف التراث في المنتجات الإبداعية بما يحوله إلى قيمة مضافة ثقافية حقيقية في اقتصاديات المعرفة الخليجية، ويحقق كذلك أهداف التنمية الثقافية المستدامة التي تصدر عنها الاستراتيجية الثقافية لدول مجلس التعاون الخليجي. تسعى هذه المقاربة البحثية إلى اقتراح استراتيجية رقمية تفاعلية ثقافية لتدريس مقررات الأدب الشعبي فولكلور في كليات الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بدول مجلس التعاون الخليجية، من خلال الاشتغال على صناعة الابتكار الثقافي الرقمي لهذه المقررات. تسعى كذلك إلى إنشاء محتوى أكاديمي رقمي خاص بالسرديات الشعبية الشفاهية من خلال المفهوم الشامل للسرد، كما قرره رولان بارت الذي يمزج السرد بالفنون التصويرية والبصرية، واقتراح إنشاء منصات ثقافية افتراضية لطلبة هذه المقررات تحقق لهم التواصل الثقافي والنقدي مع المختصين في هذا المجال من الجامعات الإقليمية والعالمية، بما في ذلك المنظمات الثقافية الدولية المعنية بحفظ التراث الثقافي اللامادي من خلال حلقات نقاشية في منصات افتراضية وتأسيس أرشيف سردي شعبي خليجي افتراضي يعنى بالأرشفة الإلكترونية للثقافة الشعبية الخليجية واستدامتها الثقافية مستقبلا. طبعا أشتغل على صناعة الابتكار الثقافي الذي يعد هو من ضمن الاقتصاد المعرفي Knowledge Society. وطبعا بالنسبة للصناعات الثقافية أصبحت الآن Creative Industry جزء من الصناعات الإبداعية في الدول وضمن استراتيجيات ثقافية لمجموعة من دول العالم بما في ذلك دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، وهي تعد من ضمن أسرع الصناعات نمواً في العالم. لذلك حاولت من خلال هذه المقاربة التركيز على دور الجامعات الخليجية، دورها الحالي والمستقبلي في إحداث صناعات ثقافية، صناعة الابتكار الثقافي. الأدوار الرئيسية للجامعات توليد المعرفة من خلال البحث العلمي ونشر المعرفة من خلال التدريس، والحفاظ على المعرفة صيانتها بين الأجيال من خلال الجامعات البحثية وجامعات الابتكار، وهناك الآن مفهوم الابتكار المفتوح. طبعا التركيز في المقاربة على مقررات الأدب الشعبي الفولكلور في بعض جامعات دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، وهي من أهم المقررات الأكاديمية التي تقدم إلى الطالب الجامعي المختص تأسيساً ثقافياً معرفياً. وبالتالي يجب أن تبدأ أدوار الجامعات الخليجية من مشاريع الجمع والتدوين لما تبقى في ذاكرة الرواة من أشكال التعبير الشعبي، وأيضاً تحويل مقررات الفولكلور إلى مشاريع تنمية ثقافية مستدامة. طبعاً أنا سأحاول من خلال هذه المقاربة، لأن بسبب ضيق الوقت المقاربة مفصلة جداً الاستراتيجية الثقافية، أحاول أن أستعرض تجربة قمت بها مع مجموعة من طلبتي 100 طالب وطالبة من مقرر الفولكلور في جامعة البحرين، وأنجزنا من خلال 10 سنوات أكبر مجموع حكائي شعبي على مستوى الوطن العربي اسمه الحكايات الشعبية البحرينية، 1000 حكاية وحكاية في 2500 صفحة مع مجموعة كبيرة من الرواة باللهجات الشعبية البحرينية وليس تحويلها إلى لغة عربية فصحى. وكذلك من خلال مئات الساعات من أعمال الفيديو التي وثقت هؤلاء الرواة من خلال أرشفة علمية منهجية. طبعا اشتغلت وكان هذا المشروع اشتغلت فيه على مدى 10 سنوات مع الطلبة، ومؤخرا حصل على المركز الأول في جائزة سرد الذهب العالمية الصادرة عن مركز أبو ظبي للغة العربية، وكما ذكرت يعد حتى الآن أكبر مجموع حكائي شعبي على مستوى الوطن العربي. تعاونت في جامعة البحرين مع أرشيف الثقافة الشعبية وأيضا المنظمة الدولية للفن الشعبي IOV في مثل هذه الشراكة الثقافية العلمية. حاليا أشتغل على مستوى التوثيق السمعي البصري لعشرات الحكايات الشعبية البحرينية، وأيضا أحاول الانتقال إلى ترجمة بعض هذه الحكايات لإدخالها من ضمن الأرشيف العالمي المتعلق بالحكايات الشعبية. إذن المرحلة الأولى تمت، لكنني الآن أشتغل على المرحلة التالية. وأيضا طبعا في مراحل لاحقة للمشروع التسويق المحلي والعربي والعالمي، لأن مواد التراث الثقافي اللامادي هي صناعة ثقافية مندرجة من ضمن اقتصاديات المعرفة. طبعا اقترح أيضا من خلال هذه الاستراتيجية إنشاء مختبرات الابتكار الثقافي، رقمنة التراث والمتحف التفاعلي، الانتقاء في أرشفة الموروثات الشفاهية في وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي من خلال توجيهها إلى مطالب بحثية وتعليمية وثقافية، وأيضا توظيف البودكاست في صناعة المحتوى الرقمي لأشكال التعبير الشعبي. ونحن الآن في عصر الشفاهية الإلكترونية، تأسيس كوادر خليجية في القيادة الثقافية وإدارة الأرشيف من خلال إنشاء التخصصات الأكاديمية على مستوى البكالوريوس والماجستير في مجال القيادة الثقافية، توظيف الذكاء الاصطناعي في عمليات التداول الثقافي الخاصة بالمرويات الشفاهية لضمان استدامتها، بما في ذلك توظيف تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي لحماية التراث الثقافي وضمان استدامته مستقبلا. يعني أنا حاولت الاختصار، لكن التركيز هنا بشكل مختصر في دقيقة واحدة أو أقل من دقيقة. يجب أن نستفيد من مقررات الفولكلور والمقررات المتعلقة بالثقافة الشعبية في الجامعات الخليجية والجامعات العربية من خلال توجيه مشاريع الطلبة توجيها عبر يعني مشروع ربما يمتد عبر سنوات، ومع مجموعة كبيرة من الطلبة من هذا المقرر، وفي النهاية ننجز مشروعا يدخل للحفاظ على التراث الثقافي اللامادي، وبالتالي نحقق أهداف اليونسكو العالمية في الحفاظ على الإرث الثقافي العالمي وتحقيق التسامح الثقافي بين العالم، لأن التداول الثقافي الشعبي يحقق السلام والأمن بين شعوب العالم المختلفة. شكرا جزيلا بروفيسور تشاتي.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dia. That was faster than I thought it was going to be, which gives us a little bit more time for any Q&A, any questions that would be directed to you by the audience. I don't immediately see any questions, but maybe I could direct a very general question both to you, Dr. Dia, and Dr. Christina. You both mentioned the use of modern technology, the use of podcasts, YouTube, I guess Instagram, etc., etc. But are you thinking in this case of projects that will create the material, or would you work with the communities to help them upload what they already have? I mention this from my own experience working with camel herding communities on the Saudi-Omani border. And what I noticed is that, of course, everybody has a smartphone. And using smartphones, they create their own videos, which they upload amongst each other, but they don't have the mechanism to upload to, for example, YouTube or some of these broader social media. So I just wonder, to what extent is it possible to work with rather than about? I see maybe Dr. Dia, you want to respond, and then I'll turn to Noof, who has a question. She has her hand raised.
Thank you so much, Professor Chatti. بالنسبة طبعا لتوظيف البودكاست أو توظيف أي وسائل متعلقة بالذكاء الاصطناعي، أنا أرى أن هي تكون يعني من خلال أيضا مؤسسات ثقافية رسمية أو شبه رسمية، من خلال مشروع وطني، وليس من خلال مثلا العمل العشوائي. فبالتالي لابد أن تكون لدينا مجموعة من الأهداف والمطالب والأوتكمز أو اللي هي المخرجات المتعلقة بهذا المشروع، وبالتالي توجيه الطلبة من خلال هذا المشروع إلى مشاريع معينة، التوثيق السمعي البصري. فمثلا أنا في مشروع الحكايات الشعبية البحرينية 1000 حكاية وحكاية، تم الجمع تدوين طبعا الكتاب في 5 مجلدات من القطع الكبير 2500 صفحة. في الوقت نفسه طلبتي هم أجروا مقابلات مع هؤلاء الرواة، مقابلات سمعية بصرية، يعني من خلال أفلام الفيديو هي أفلام متقنة وفيها شرائط توثيق كاملة، اسم الراوي والعمر والمهنة وجميع الأشياء المتعلقة بالتوثيق وزمن التوثيق. وتمت طبعا هي بالتوازي مع مشروع التدوين الكتابي وبإشرافي. طبعا أكيد تليها مرحلة من الفرز، لأنني بعد ذلك أخذت هذه الأفلام وجعلتها هي أرشيف الآن من ضمن المنظمة الدولية للفن الشعبي، جزء من أرشيفها. فلا بد أكيد من وجود مؤسسات ثقافية كبرى تشرف على أعمال الجمع، الذي ربما مستقبلا يكون جزء من متاحف تفاعلية نحتاجها بشدة في الوطن العربي. Thank you so much, Professor Chati.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zia. Can I turn to Noof? You have your hand raised. I have that first for me.
Yes, thank you, Professor Chati. I just, first of all, just want to add a quick point to your own question about technology and podcasts in particular. Yesterday in Ryan's presentation, you also mentioned, Ryan, that you're working on a podcast with storytellers from the Moroccan Halaqa tradition. So I think this idea that Christina talked about kind of listening is very interesting, and the links between the presentations about that, about listening to these traditions rather than reading them. My question is to Christina, and I just think it's so these layers of translations that you talked about, and the kind of the flow from one language to the next, back to the source language, and then to another language, I think is very interesting. So I was wondering if you could expand on that process and maybe talk about kind of how you captured the performative aspects within those different languages, because I just find it fascinating how many languages you were working with during that project.
Dr. Christina, perhaps you could respond.
Yes, thank you. Well, it was really a complex process, and we also had a very limited time frame to finalize the project, so that limited our ability to really to go more in depth. But the performative aspect of all the practices and experiences we gathered were we mainly capture it through from the people in the communities. And so the other layers of translation were more literal translations. I mean, it was more words. The performative part of it, which I refer to as worlds, was from the people in the communities. And we did it in several different ways, depending on the local conditions for communicating online. So, for example, sometimes we were able to set up collective WhatsApp calls. And so we talked to people through the interpreters, but then they would perform a little bit of their music or their dance, or their storytelling. They would do that for us via the WhatsApp collective calls. So we had a visual aspect of it, and the listening part of it. In other cases, it was impossible to have video chats, so it was only done through audio. But they also chanted, particularly with the Aka people. They sent us a lot of audios with which they recorded with their phones during their rituals, so we could listen to what they were doing. So it's basically what we did. WhatsApp was, in fact, WhatsApp was the most I forgot the word, the most useful tool that we used during this project, because the other ones we tried Zoom, we tried other platforms for video exchange, and that didn't work. So WhatsApp was our best ally in this endeavor. Also, I wanted to comment quickly just that I do think that modern media allows us, has the great potential, which is a potential in the sense that we need to develop the capacities for people to share from the communities. And as Professor Chati was saying, well, our idea and how we work in the chair I chair, but also in a lot of countries in Latin America, is that these recordings or these audiovisual documents should come from the communities. But it is a fact that sometimes they do not have the knowledge to do that in a more, let's say, organized way. So that is one area of opportunity where we can work with them. So it's their own voices and what they want to convey, which is put online. And that, I think, is these modern media give us the great opportunity to, at the same time, document and have archives of storytellings, dances, songs, etc., and share. So it's more of a comprehensive practice for safeguarding. We at the same time we are documenting and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. I think this is a really important point that maybe we could follow up, because I find, for example, WhatsApp it's often used within a large kin group to record songs, to record elements of intangible heritage, but that's because it's a WhatsApp group and they don't have a mechanism for moving beyond that. But we can come back to that maybe later on. Dr. Osama, you had your hand up. Maybe I can turn to you.
مساءكم طيب، شكرا للبروفيسورة شاتي. مداخلتي للدكتور ضياء الكعبي، أولا مداخلة قيمة. بالنسبة لسؤالي أولا يعني أشكر الدكتورة ضياء على العمل الجبار الذي قامت به من خلال غرس قيم البحث في هذا الموروث الثقافي الشعبي. سؤالي أولا، هل يمكننا دكتورة ضياء أن نتحدث عن انقراض الحكاية الشعبية، طبعا بموت حافظتها، لأن هذا الموروث هو موروث شفهي. عندما نتحدث عن الأجداد، نتحدث عن الشيوخ أو الجدات أو حافظة هذا الموروث، هل بموتهم سيندثر هذا الموروث معهم، أم هل ما قمت به طبعا هو عمل جبار، لأن قمت بتدوين هذا الموروث الشعبي؟ وهذا هو أملنا من خلال هذه الندوات ومن خلال هذه الجلسات، لأن تدوين هذا الموروث هو طبعا وحفاظ عليه من اندثار، مواكبة الأجيال الصاعدة مع الأجيال القادمة، الاستفادة طبعا من هذا الموروث. نقطة أخرى أستاذ ضياء، ما هي الصعوبات التي وجدتيها عندما أردت أن تجمعي هذه الحكايات؟ طبعا هذه الحكايات يجب أن تكون هناك صعوبات مادية، صعوبات معنوية، طبعا لحسن الحظ وجدت دعم الجامعة. إذا لم يكن هناك دعم للجامعة، هل كنت أستاذ ضياء، هل أمكنك أن تجمعي هذه الحكايات؟ وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا لك بروفيسور أسامة طبعا على هذين السؤالين والمداخلات التي هي في غاية الأهمية. أولا طبعا السؤال الأول بخصوص مثلا انقراض رواة الحكايات الشعبية بموتهم، فهل ربما سنعاني في المستقبل القريب من انقراض الحكايات الشعبية أو حتى أيضا الرواة؟ ما يحدث الآن من خلال طبعا هذه المشاريع التي مثلا ما قمت به وقام به ربما زملاء ونظراء في جامعات عربية أو حتى جامعات أخرى، طبعا هي محاولة إعادة إحياء ما تبقى من الحكاية الشعبية، خاصة عندما توثق توثيقا سمعيا بصريا، وعندما تتاح الآن في جيل السوشيال ميديا، جيل الشفاهية الإلكترونية الجديدة، نعيد ربما إعادة إنتاج الراوي الجديد. فأذكر هنا الآن مثالين. مثال من المغرب العربي، الدكتورة نجيمة طاطاي قامت بعمل جميل جدا وجبار في الحفاظ على التراث الثقافي المغربي، طبعا خاصة فيما يتعلق بالحكايات الشعبية. ماذا فعلت؟ طبعا هي حاولت أن تخلق الراوي الصغير، ذهبت إلى المدارس وحاولت أيضا أن تعطي تقاليد رواية القصص أو الحكايات الشعبية المغربية لهؤلاء الأطفال الصغار حتى يعيدوا إنتاجها مرة أخرى. دكتور عبد العزيز المسلم رئيس معهد الشارقة للتراث حاول أيضا إعادة إحياء الموروث الشعبي مرة أخرى عن طريق إعادة إنتاجه في حكايات أخرى جديدة، فبالتالي من خلال الكتابة يعني يستثمر المروي الشعبي سواء الخليجي أو حتى العربي، يعيد إنتاجه في حكايات أخرى من خلال روايات أخرى. فبالتالي طبعا الذي حفظ التراث الثقافي العربي هو الراوي المحافظ وكذلك الراوي المبدع. فإن شاء الله يعني من خلال طريقة التدوين نحافظ على ما تبقى من ذاكرة الرواة وذاكرتنا الثقافية، لأن مع كل راو يموت تندثر مكتبة كاملة من السرد الشفاهي. النقطة الأخرى، هناك صعوبات كبيرة كانت بالنسبة للمشروع، لكن طبعا بفضل الله وثم طبعا دعم الجامعة جامعة البحرين وكذلك دعم المنظمة الدولية للفن الشعبي ممثلة في الأستاذ علي عبد الله خليفة، الداعم اللوجستي والمادي للمشروع الذي كلمة شكرا طبعا لا تفي حقه، وشكر له واجب في هذا المجال لأنه آمن بالمشروع وكان معي في المراحل المختلفة. المشروع لأنه امتدت الفترة الزمنية مدة 10 سنوات يحتاج إلى صبر أيوب، صبر جميل جدا، لأن في مرحلة من المراحل قد يتراجع الإنسان عن مشروعه لأن العمر البشري قصير، فبالتالي قد يتراجع وقد يمل. المشروع في الأصل هو ضعف العدد، يعني هو في الأصل كان في 10 مجلدات، ولكنني أخذت من عمري مدة 3 سنوات للمراجعة والتدقيق والتنقيح واختزاله إلى 5 مجلدات، وذلك طبعا حافظت على أن كل حكاية من الحكايات ربما تكون لها أكثر من رواية، حافظت على تعدد المروي وجعلت ما قمت به بمثابة المادة الخام الأولية للباحثين الشعبيين في العالم كله. أستاذ علي عبد الله خليفة طبعا قام بإرسال نسخ من هذا الكتاب تقريبا إلى المراكز المعنية بحفظ التراث الثقافي المادي وغير المادي في العالم كله، لأنه هو رئيس المنظمة الدولية للفن الشعبي. هناك أيضا نسخة إلكترونية متاحة، ربما طبعا سأتيحها إن شاء الله لأستاذة الدكتورة منيرة الغدير وذلك لإرسالها إليكم. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lia. I'm going to turn to Professor Saldana. You had your hand up for quite some time.
Thank you, Professor Chatty. And thank you both the speakers for your very interesting talks. I have two brief and simple questions. I would like to ask Dr. Christina whether the collection of oral heritage was done only online, or did you also do the traditional way of visiting and recording and documenting? And to Dr. Dhea, I would like to say thank you for sharing your wonderful project with us. I wish it is translated soon and we are also able to access it. But I would like to ask the number 1001 that you have documented. You mentioned the number 1001, if I'm right. Very interesting. Does it have what I'm thinking? It has a connection with the 1001 Arabian Nights. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few questions building up, so maybe I'm going to ask Dr. Ryan his question, and then we'll turn to Christina. There's some questions coming in from the floor that I've had. Dr. Ryan.
Thank you, Dawn. My question is for Dr. الكعبي وبإذنكم أنا سأطرح السؤال باللغة العربية. ذكرت باللي تم تدوين أكبر مجموع حكايات شعبي العربي بالعالم، وهذا إنجاز كبير. وإلى درجة ما أنا أتفق مع دكتور خضراوي أن تدوين هذه الحكايات هو الحفاظ عليها. ولكن سؤالي هو من في رأيك هم جمهور هذا المشروع في الآخر؟ فقط من خارج السياق ديال سياق الأرشيف، هل هناك جمهور في الخليج للحكايات المدونة الشعبية عند الناس؟
لن أجيب. شكرا بروفيسور طبعا على هذا السؤال. بالنسبة لي الجمهور في الخليج أو حتى أيضا في مثلا البحرين، أول شيء طبعا هو أكبر مجموع حكائي شعبي على مستوى الوطن العربي وليس العالم. بالنسبة للجمهور لدينا جمهور، يعني حتى على مستوى المتلقي العادي هناك الكثير يعشقون التراث الشعبي والحكايات الشعبية، خاصة عندما أتكلم هنا طبعا الوطن العربي مهتم بالثقافة الشعبية، لكن أتكلم عن المنطقة الخليجية هناك اهتمام. هناك مثلا كتاب الدراما يهتمون بالفولكلور أو هذه الحكايات، تحويلها إلى دراما تلفزيونية، تحويلها كذلك إلى مثلا رسوم متحركة، تحويلها أيضا إلى منجز روائي أو منجز قصصي. يعني حتى الإنسان العادي لدينا مهتم بالثقافة الشعبية، مهتم بالفولكلور. فلما صار في تدشين طبعا لهذا الكتاب، كان في عندي تقريبا 200 نسخة مجانية من المنظمة الدولية للفن الشعبي. يعني كل نسخة طبعا هي 5 مجلدات. في غضون تقريبا 3-4 أيام نفدت النسخ الذي طلبها أناس عاديون ليسوا أكاديميين، كانت لديهم درجة كبيرة من الاحتفاء بالمشروع. فلدينا يعني في الوطن العربي وأيضا في الخليج ذلك الاهتمام حتى الآن، حتى مع الأجيال الجديدة بالفولكلور، كل ما يتعلق بالثقافة الشعبية، لأنها هوية ثقافية وطنية في المقام الأول والأخير. نجده في البحرين، في المملكة العربية السعودية، في الإمارات، في جميع دول مجلس التعاون الخليج، وكذلك حتى أيضا الدول العربية جميعها لديها ذلك الاهتمام.
شكرا دكتور.
Going to add another question for Dr. Christina, and then we may have to end this session. A question from Zubair Al-Ansari, asking, as experts in oral tradition, how do you deal with differences and maybe conflicting narratives in transmitted materials? Is there any established procedure or model for dealing with such? Dr. Christina.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. So I'm going to address this last one before. What we decided to do for this specific project was when a lot of the times the narratives we got from different participants were pretty much in synchrony, so there was no problem. But whenever a different narrative emerged and there were conflicting or different, sometimes conflicting, sometimes just different views on something, then we included both the views or the 3 different views that were shared with us, explaining that on that point there were different perspectives. But that was just for this project. So I think this is an issue that remains to be that we need to keep on reflecting on it and how to address the multivocality of experiences. Regarding Professor Savannah's question, no, we were not able to go to the field. All the team thought that would have been the best way to do the project, but there was no budget and no time. So we had to work online, which in the end ended up giving us another type of altogether experience. So it made different challenges emerge. And of course, we lost in depth of knowledge. We gained in having to reflect on how to address the challenges of working online in an unequally connected world, because we have to know that we are connected in the cities, but these people we work with were somewhere, sometimes we're in the forests, in the desert, so they had to come to a main village in order to be able to gather for us to dialogue with them. So inequalities need to be considered in this kind of projects. And I also have a question. I don't know if there's time for Professor Alkabi. If we have time, I just wanted to ask if the students you work with are sometimes also members of the communities you gather stories from. Because we've had in Mexico more and more people are coming to study anthropology or cultural studies or folklore, that it's young people from the communities. So they go back to their communities and apply what they have learned at the universities in order to safeguard what they deem important in their own context. So how is it for you?
Thank you so much, Professor. بالنسبة طبعا للطلبة أو جمع الطلبة الذين اشتغلوا معي هم طلبة يأخذون مقرر اسمه الفولكلور. فمقرر الفولكلور هو جزء من برنامج بكالوريوس اللغة العربية وآدابها، الفولكلور الأدب الشعبي، وهو مقرر تقريبا إجباري. فبالتالي وهؤلاء الطلبة يأتون مقرر السنة الرابعة. فهم يكونون على درجة عالية من النضج، لأنني في البداية أدرسهم النظريات الخاصة بالفولكلور من الكلاسيكية والحديثة ما بعد الحديثة، وبعدين نبدأ بعد ذلك في الجمع الميداني. طبعا أتيت لهم بمجموعة من الخبراء المتخصصين في إجراء الجمع الميداني، أخضعوهم لمجموعة من الدورات، وبعد ذلك عملت نوع من المسح الميداني الشامل لخارطة مملكة البحرين المناطق المختلفة، فركزت كل مجموعة بحثية على منطقة معينة على مدى سنوات حتى يصير في نوع مسح شامل لجميع المدن جميع القرى. البحرين صغيرة ومع ذلك فيها يمكن أكثر من لهجة، ليس لدينا لهجة واحدة، لدينا تنوع لهجي، فكنت حريصة على أن التنوعات اللهجية تكون واضحة لأنها تحمل تقاليد ثقافية أيضا. هذه طبعا كان الموضوع، هم طلبة تخصص اللغة العربية، والجميل أنهم بعد ذلك طبعا البعض وصل بحث التخرج، والبعض الآن في الماجستير يريد التخصص أيضا في الفولكلور. شكرا جزيلا دكتور بروفيسور، شكرا.
Thank you. I'm going to have to draw this question and answer period to a close, although we have other questions. Maybe we can come back to them later on. I would like to move now to the second session and invite Dr. Miriam Al-Usaimi, who is a researcher in Saudi Arabia, to give her presentation on translating Saudi oral heritage, challenges and strategies. Dr. Miriam, please.
Hi, thank you, Professor Chati. I would like to thank the UNESCO Chair for Translating Cultures and King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies for inviting me. I am a student from Princess Noor University. I'm very honored to be here today. I will talk about, did I share my screen? I will share my screen. Sorry. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So,
We see your screen.
yeah, thank you. I will be talking about translating Saudi oral heritage. I will focus on the challenges and strategies, translation strategies. To begin, I want to discuss the origins of Saudi folklore. As we know, oral transmission has been the main means of communication throughout most of history. However, at some point in history, when the standardization of Arabic and the canonization of classical poetry, some folklore genres became marginalized and they went largely undocumented. However, we have the first collection of Saudi folklore. It was published in 1967 by Abdelkarim Al-Juhayman. And after that, we have many documentations and published books about the folklore. Also, as historians, some Saudi historians, early Saudi historians, used some folklore genres as historical artifacts. For example, oral poetry was used to learn about the history of the Arabian Peninsula. I want to talk about the oldest form of Arabic poetry, and we have a musical meter or a poetic meter called Rajaz, and it's considered the oldest form of Arabic poetry. It's simple, so that's why it was used in camel herding chants. Camel herding chants is when the camel herder say these chants to communicate with the animals. And the reason why the Rajaz was used in particular, because the rhythm of Rajaz resembled the sound of camels stepping on the sand. And because of its simplicity, it was also used in preaching and work songs because it was rhythmic. I want to talk now about the challenges. The first challenge is kind of a universal challenge. We talked about it in some sessions here. It's about the oral performance and how oral performances are kind of creative and dynamic. So as you can see here, it exists within a community, and the orator or the storyteller kind of communicates and interacts with his audience. This leads to variation in the folk tales. I want to quote Dr. Lamia Ba'ashan here, who says, since there were as many I cannot, okay. Can you see my screen? Sorry, okay, here. Since there were as many tellers as there were tales to tell, the stories became individualized and varied, and their forms were never stable or complete. Tellers could manipulate the sequence of events, the roles of characters, and the length of the plot to formulate their own versions of the same tales. Also, we have Dr. Saad Swayan, who is a leading Saudi anthropologist. He acknowledges the losses that occur when we try to transcribe oral performances. So he describes oral performances as theatrical, and they depend on the relationship between the orator and his listeners. He describes transcribing oral narratives as a mutilation of the oral narrative because it plucks it out of its natural performative context and places it in an artificial and odd context. Now I want to move on to oral dialects, which are underrepresented in many oral texts. A dialect is a register of language that is distinct from the standard language, and it has been perceived as inferior and ineloquent. This, as I said, led to underrepresentation. Also, oral dialects sometimes can pose as a communicative barrier. I have an example here. It's the research paper by this researcher, Saudi researcher, who tried to collect, translate, and analyze folk tales from his native region in Jazan. And he was unable to interpret the tales or translate them. What he did is that he translated the folk tales from the dialects to standard Arabic. This is known as intralingual translation, and we can see it in most oral texts. Although here, in this case, it was a methodological compromise, in the oral texts, and many of them, it's actually a stylistic choice because authors prefer high language or standard language or over dialectal or over the dialect. Some oral text does not have any trace of the dialect spoken, and some of them include some vernacular expressions, and they mix those expressions with the standard Arabic. So we have a kind of diglossic text because they combine two registers within the text. An example would be Dr. Abdelkarim Al-Jihaman, a collection. He has 6 volumes, and they all contain just a few vernacular expressions. And the majority of his work is written in standard Arabic. We have Abdul Khal also, who has 2 collections. I want to talk about the reasons why those authors prefer to intralingually translate the folk tales. Dr. Abdelkarim Al-Jihaman said he wanted his work to reach more audience, though this falls under the first parameter of intralingual translation, which is knowledge, and it's when the author tries to explain some elements in the work. We have also time, which is when we have archaic forms of language or dialects, and the author translates the work for a contemporary audience. We have also culture and space. And for the point about space, we noticed that most intralingual translations actually the length of the work is affected because it relies on simplification. So the text will be either reduced or it will be either extended beyond the original version. I want to talk about another challenge, which is the connection to poetry. Most folk tales, most Saudi folk tales contain poetry or poetic segments. This is because it's very present in the culture, poetry. This is the case for most biographical tales, which tell the tale of a hero who is mostly a poet or a knight. And the tale-teller will weave a narrative around their poems. Also, some folktales consist of a single poem that is kind of a dialogue between characters. And this form of folktale usually is about a mythological creature who intercepts a human traveler. We've seen this theme, a very common theme in this kind of tales. The last challenge I want to talk about is cultural differences, of course, because folklore is a reflection of culture and the way of life of the people who produce it. There are many cultural differences, and as we said, folklore is culturally specific. And Hornby points out that the degree of translatability of a text depends on how culturally specific it is and the distance between the languages involved in the communication. Also, I want to talk about some elements in Saudi folktales who are more culturally specific. I want to talk about openings and closings. So an opening is when the tale-teller announces that he's going to tell a tale, and it's usually to set the tale in a placeless and timeless context. However, in Saudi folktale openings or opening formulas, there are usually religious references. As you can see here, the tale-teller usually asks his audience to say a prayer. Here we have this one I translated. Here is one, here is one, and one is Allah. This is very common, especially in Najdi folktales. Actually, Abdulkarim Jihaman calls these types of tales as sabhuna, and sabhuna is derived from the word tasbih, which is a prayer. And the folktales that start with this kind of opening is called sabhuna. So this is how common it is, this opening is. As for closings, it's kind of different because the cultural specificity stems from the humorous and rhyming expressions in the folktale closings. We have here some tale-tellers will tell their audience that they just met the characters. For example, I have this one, the last one here. The tale-teller, yes, the tale-teller will tell his audience that he just met the characters, that he dined at their wedding, and that he just been there. So this is a very cultural specific kind of statement here. Now I want to move on to translation strategies. Although there is not a single translation strategy that is considered ideal, we have some scholars who recommends that the folktales has to be or the culture in the folktales has to be preserved. We have Venuti here, who recommends selecting marginal texts, and not only that, but also to preserve the cultural elements in the text. He says that the very choice of a foreign text for translation can also signify its foreignness by challenging domestic canons for foreign literatures and domestic stereotypes for foreign cultures. Also, I want to point out this paper by a Saudi scholar, Al-Harbi. She collected and analyzed and translated 100 Najdi proverbs, and she arrived at 3 translation strategies that were effective in translating those proverbs. The first translation strategy is dynamic equivalence. I provided an example here. This proverb was translated using dynamic equivalence, which made sure that the translation sounds natural, but also maintaining the main meaning of the Najdi proverb.
You need to wrap up, please.
Yes. The second one here, it's cultural substitution. It's kind of different. It's when you provide a proverb that is kind of equivalent to the original proverb we have here. لا فات الفوت ما ينفع صوت. It was translated to it's now It's no use crying over spilled milk, which is a famous English proverb. Also, we have paraphrase, which is when the wording changes, but with while maintaining the meaning. We have this proverb here. يتهوشون على مربط البقرة. It was translated to they argue over trivial things and ignore the bigger issues, which is kind of descriptive. It's just describing the meaning in the original proverb. To conclude, I want to say that translation is a significant preservation tool, and that although Saudi folklore poses many challenges, such as dynamic oral setting or communication barriers, and also the delineation of the authentic dialectal language by the elite scholars, but what we have now is an extensive wave of documentation of the oral heritage of the kingdom. And I hope that with these efforts, that the translation is implemented as a preservation tool, especially by the Saudi Heritage Commission, who has many efforts in the preservation and documentation of oral heritage. I hope that translation is also included in the procedures. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miriam. We'll move on now directly to our last speaker. This is Dr. Osama Al-Khadraoui, also a researcher from Morocco. And the title of his presentation is Oral Heritage and the Question of Documentation, particularly meaning, translation, and this will be presented in Arabic. So Dr. Osama, please.
مساءكم طيب. شكرا للدكتورة البروفيسور شاطي. في البداية دقيقة. شكرا للجميع، مساءكم طيب. سعيد بأن أكون معكم اليوم في هذا الورش العلمي الهام. حضرت البارحة الجلسة الأولى التي كانت قيمة جدا. لسوء حظي أني كنت مريض وما زلت مريضا، لكنني حرصت على أن أحضر. لم أشارككم في النقاش، ولكن استمعت كثيرا واستمتعت بكل المداخلات. شكرا طبعا للدكتور والصديق ريان ميلوف قرطبة على اطلاعه على بحثي. شرف لي، وإن شاء الله إذا أتيت المغرب قريبا نلتقي. بدء أشكر صاحبة السمو الملك الأميرة مها بنت محمد الفيصل، الأمين العام لمركز فيصل البحوث، على إتاحته لهذه الفرصة، ولكرسي الترجمة الثقافات في مركز فيصل البحوث، وخصوصا الدكتورة منيرة الغدير على هذا الجهد الجبار والقيم الذين يبذلونه في هذا المسار. أولا على إتاحتهم الفرصة للمشاركة والتفاعل في موضوع هام يهم ترجمة التقاليد الشفهية وصون التراث الثقافي رفقة خبراء وأساتذة باحثين في مجال الترجمة وصون التراث. ثانيا، لا ضير في القول أن أهمية الموروث الشعبي تتجلى بالأساس في درجة تأثير هذا التراث في رسم صورة الحياة الاجتماعية للمجتمع وتوجيه عملياته الاجتماعية والثقافية من خلال ما تتضمنه من قيم وعادات وتقاليد وأخلاق ومعتقدات. وبالتالي قد تفيد هذه المداخلة باعتبارها محاولة تساعد في الوقوف على نمط الحياة الاجتماعية في ضوء الموروث الشعبي. صناعة المحتوى اليوم، أو بمفهوم الذكاء الاصطناعي، هو توثيق للذاكرة والحفاظ عليها. ونحن نعلم أن هذا الموروث يتميز بخاصية أساسية، هي خاصية مجهولية المؤلف. إذا كنا نتحدث عن الموروث الشعبي فلا يمكن أن نتحدث إلا من خلال هذه الخاصية الأساسية، مجهولية المؤلف، وبشكل أساسي يعتمد على الشفهية. هذا الموروث شئنا أم أبينا ينتقل من جيل إلى جيل عبر الشفهية، عبر الذاكرة الجمعية أو التذاكر إن صح التعبير. طبعا ترجمته ستساعد في انتشاره وذيوعه والحفاظ عليه. يقول الأديب المالي أماطو همباتي: عندما يموت عجوز في إفريقيا فكأنما احترقت مكتبة. هذه صورة حية رمزية فيها كثير من المعاني، أنه فعلا عندما يموت عجوز في هذه الأرض فهي بمثابة إحراق مكتبة، لأنه يحمل ذخائر شعبية ثقافية تراثية، إلا القليل التي سجلناه أو دوناه، إلا أنه فاتنا الكثير. من هنا يمكن أن نطرح العديد من الأسئلة: عن أي تقاليد شفهية نتحدث؟ هل جميعها أم سنخصص؟ هل يمكن أن نتحدث فعلا عن مشترك ثقافي بيننا جميعا؟ كل هذه الثلة من الباحثين والأساتذة، ما هو المشترك التراثي الوحيد الذي يمكن أن يجمعنا؟ إنما نتحدث عن الحكاية الشعبية في البحرين، في السعودية، في المغرب، في الولايات المتحدة، في المكسيك، في إسبانيا. هناك شيء مشترك يمكن أن نشتغل عليه جميعا ونطوره ونوطده لكي نربط الأجيال فيما بعضها. طبعا من لا ماضي له لا حاضر ولا مستقبل لديه. لا يمكن أن نبني المستقبل بدون أن نرجع إلى الماضي. إذا رجعنا إلى الماضي نتحدث عن التاريخ. أنا عندما أدرس طلبتي في مادة تاريخ فنون الحضارات بجامعة بن طفيل، لا يمكن أن نتحدث عن الفنون إذا لم نعود إلى الإنسان ما قبل الحجري، إذا لم نعود إلى الإنسان في البدائي، كيف استطاع أن يعيش، كان همه الوحيد هو كيف يبقى على قيد الحياة، كيف استطاع أن يقاوم الطبيعة، يقاوم الحيوانات لكي يضمن عيشه. لكي لا أطيل، سأبتدئ بقصة جميلة ولكنها معبرة. نشر الكاتب البرازيلي باولو كويلو قصة قصيرة يقول فيها: كان الأب يحاول أن يقرأ الجريدة ولكن ابنه الصغير لم يكف عن مضايقته، وحين تعب الأب من ابنه قام بقطع ورقة في الصحيفة كانت تحوي خريطة العالم ومزقها إلى قطع صغيرة وقدمها لابنه، وطلب منه إعادة تجميع الخريطة، ثم عاد إلى قراءة صحيفته ظنا أن الطفل سيبقى مشغولا بقية اليوم. إلا أنه لم تمر 15 دقيقة حتى عاد الابن إليه وقد أعاد ترتيب الخريطة. فتساءل الأب مذهولا: هل كانت أمك تعلمك الجغرافيا؟ رد الطفل قائلا: لا، لكن كانت هناك صورة الإنسان على الوجه الآخر من الورقة، وعندما أعدت بناء الإنسان أعدت بناء العالم. وعندما نعيد بناء هذا الموروث الشعبي والثقافي والفكري، طبعا بصيغة أو بأخرى نعيد بناء الإنسان، لأن عندما نبني الإنسان نبني العالم، نبني الوجود، نبني الهوية، نبني الذاكرة، نبني الموروث، وطبعا نتشبث به. ومن هنا مداخلتي سأجيزها لضيق الوقت في 3 مستويات. المستوى الأول عندما تحدثت عن الخصوصية هو أن الموروث الشعبي هو مجمل الفنون القولية التلقائية، وهذه الفنون هي على رأس قائمة فروع التراث، ونقلت هذه الفنون بلهجة دارجة من جيل إلى جيل وبشكل شفاهي، وهي تفاعل الإنسان مع الطبيعة مع الإنسان. والأدب الشعبي بهذا المفهوم عبارة عن تتويج خبرات الإنسان ومعرفته وأحاسيسه ومشاعره، وتشتمل هذه الفنون على الحكاية الشعبية والمثل والأغاني الشعبية والنادرة والنكتة والباعة والأغاني إلى غير ذلك من التيمات. وهنا يجب أن نحدد سمات الموروث الشعبي، يجب أن نفهمها، أن نعيها، أن نحيط بها. السمة الأولى هي اللغة، السمة الثانية كما قلت سابقا هي الشفهية وليس الشفوية، السمة الثالثة هي الذاكرة، الإيقاع، البساطة والاختزال في هذا الموروث الشعبي، الموضوع الذي ينتقل من موروث يعني من تيمة من مجال إلى مجال، من المثل إلى الحكاية إلى الألغاز إلى غير ذلك، الشكل، البنية الشكلية، ثم العفوية والتلقائية. المستوى الثاني والمغزى: إن كل نوع من أنواع الأدب، بل كل قطعة أدبية شعبية لها وظيفة معينة، وهذه الوظيفة هي الدور الذي يقوم به الجزء أو النوع في الحياة الثقافية لدى شعب معين. فكل شكل من أشكال الأدب الشعبي له وظيفة واحدة أو أكثر، وقد تشترك معه نماذج أخرى من نفس الشكل أو من أشكال أخرى بنفس الوظيفة، وهي بعض الوظائف التي يقوم بها الأدب الشعبي. وهنا سأشير إلى وظيفتين أساسيتين: الوظيفة التعليمية التي توجد فيها اللغة، الحس الفني، تنمية القدرة على التفكير. الوظيفة التربوية، التأكيد على قيم الجماعة، تنمية الاشتراك، تنمية الانتماء للجماعة، ترسيخ القيم والمعارف الثقافية ونشرها، التضامن والتآزر النفسي والعاطفي للجماعة. قبل أن أمر إلى النقطة الثانية إلى مستوى الترجمة، المجتمع العالم يمر بتحولات اجتماعية، ثقافية، اقتصادية، سياسية، يجب أن نواكبها من خلال هذا الموروث. اختلاف الأجيال، اختلاف الهموم، لكل جيل همه، لكل جيل وعيه، لكل جيل إدراكه. تحولنا من أسر تقليدية يوجد فيها العم والخال والابن وابن الخال إلى أسر نووية صغيرة جدا. هذا نعيشه نحن في المغرب، يمكن أن تعيشه في الخليج أو في أوروبا. تحول نمط الأسرة أربك شيئا أو نوعا ما قضية التماسك أو التعلق بهذا الموروث الشعبي. لأن عندما كانت الجدة في الصغار تحكي الحكايات لأطفالها، لأحفادها، لصغارها، دائما ذاك ارتباط بهذا الموروث الشعبي. اليوم أصبح يعيش الأب والأم والابن، يعني غياب الجدة، غياب الذاكرة، غياب المكتبة التي تحدثت عنها في الأول. بالنسبة للترجمة المستوى الثالث، كما تعلمون أن الترجمة هو فن أدبي، أو بعبارة أدق إبداع فني خالص. هي استكشاف لعوالم جديدة تفيد قضية مهمة جدا، وهي قضية التلاقح الثقافي والفكري بين الشعوب. عندما كانت تتحدث الأستاذة ضياء عن الحكايات الشعبية في البحرين، سؤال أخير لم أذكره هو هذا العمل الميداني. إذا أردنا أن نعرفه للدكتورة كاتي، إذا أرادت أن تقرأه بلغتها، هل سيحمل معه نفس المعنى؟ هل سيحمل معه نفس الفحوى أو المضمون التراثي الشعبي، أم أنه سيفقد العديد من هذا الموروث؟ يقول المهاتما غاندي: يجب أن أفتح نوافذ بيتي لكي تهب علي رياح كل الثقافات، شريطة أن لا تقتلعني من جذوري. التمسك بالجذور هو شيء هام وأساسي لجميعنا. التمسك بالموروث، الحفر في هذا الموروث، التنقيب في هذا الموروث، لأنه يساعدنا كثيرا كثيرا. وهذه الجلسة يعني سعيد جدا بأن أكون أمام الأساتذة والباحثين لكي أشارككم وتشاركونني هذا الهم، لأنه فعلا إذا لم يكن لنا شغف هذا البحث فكيف يمكن أن نبدع فيه؟ وهنا ثقافة الإبداع عند الإنسان. الترجمة يجب أن نحددها من خلال عدة مستويات لغوية. الترجمة ليست ترجمة حرفية، بل ترجمة يجب أن نجمع فيها بين الأدبي، بين الاجتماعي، بين الثقافي. هناك تداخل أو تكامل بين العلوم لكي نعطي ترجمة راقية، ترجمة إبداعية، ترجمة يسعد بها الجميع، ترجمة كل من قرأها يجد فيها نفسه. أنا هكذا أرى الموضوع. فعلا هل يمكن أن نتحدث عن عمل مشترك بيننا جميعا؟ دور التقاليد الشفهية في الحفاظ على التراث الثقافي والتاريخي، مصطلحات يجب أن نلم بها: الشفهية، الذاكرة، التاريخ، الموروث الشعبي، الراوي الحكواتي الذي لديه دور كبير في إبلاغ أو تبليغ هذا الموروث. القيم، الربط بين الماضي والحاضر، السياقات التي تحدث عليها الدكتورة سابقا، السياق، الأرشفة، الترجمة، المتخيل الجماعي وجب الوقوف عنده، تداخل العلوم والتخصصات، هل هو نعمة أو نقمة؟ ولكن هنا هو نعمة. التوعية، تحديد المتدخلين في هذه العملية التوثيقية، خصوصية أن الإنسان كائن حكائي اجتماعي، كائن رامز. اليوم أصبح شئنا أبينا أصبح إنسانا انطوائي له عالمه الخاص والإنترنت، وهذا شيء خطير، لأن يجب أن نأخذ من عالم الإنترنت الشيء الإيجابي وليس الشيء السلبي. كيف في الترجمة اللغة العامية واللغة الوسطى، اللهجات المحلية، يجب أن نأخذها بعين الاعتبار. كيف نترجمها وكيف نمزج بينها؟ هل ما زلنا اليوم ننتج موروثا شعبيا؟ للأسف احنا أصبحنا مستهلكين، أم أننا مجرد مستهلكين؟ ولكن نحن مستهلكين. موت الراوي طبعا هو بمثابة أحراق مكتبة، انقراض الموروث بموت حافظته، هذه أمور نعيشها للأسف. من خلال هذه الندوة ومن خلال يعني هذه الأوراش يجب أن ندق ناقوس تدوين هذا الموروث، الحفاظ عليه. إن شاء الله تكون هناك محاضرات بشكل حضوري أو عن بعد. المهم أن نبقى يعني مواكبين لهذا العمل المهم. أخيرا أريد أن أطلعكم على كتابي الأخير، وهو كتاب عمل ميداني قمت به في مراكش: أسرار الحكوات، جمالية الحكي وذخائر السير الشعبية. هو عمل كان بمثابة حلم ولكنه أصبح حقيقة، لأنني حبي لهذا الموروث جعلني أبحث فيه ميدانيا. انطلقت فيه من نظرية التلقي، الجمالية التلقي ليانس روبرت هاوس، وثلاثية أفق انتظار، والقارئ أفق التوقع، من خلال كيف يمكن أن نطبق هذه النظرية على موروث شعبي متمثل في الحلقة الشعبية بساحة جامع الفنا. للأسف هذه الساحة الشعبية التي اليوم للأسف اندثرت، للأسف مات الراوي، أصبحت ساحة مملوءة بالمأكولات الشعبية، فقدت بريقها، فقدت موروثها، فقدت تاريخها، لأنها فقدت رواتها، وهذا هو للأسف ما نعانيه. الراوي يمثل ذاكرة ثقافية، متخيل اجتماعي، صوت ثقافي يستعيره كل الساردين، محاولين تقديمه بصورة وأشكال تتلائم مع الإبداعات السردية. سعيت في هذا الكتاب إلى نفض الغبار عن مخزون ثقافي مهم. كانت ألسنة الرواة الشعبيين إلى حد قريب تتداول بصيغ وأشكال مختلفة، يمتزج فيها المتوارث بالفردي، إذ يعمد هؤلاء الرواة إلى إضافة أحداث وتفاصيل وحوارات جديدة إلى محكية سابقة. أنا هذا الكتاب أتمنى أن تكون هناك هيئة، لأن هذا الكتاب يحتاج إلى ترجمة إلى الإنجليزية لكي يصبح شائعا ويقرأه الإنسان الآخر بصيغة أو بأخرى. وإن شاء الله إذا
Dr.
كانت هناك
Osama, can you
فرصة
wrap
أو
up now,
هيئة.
please?
نعم.
Okay.
هل انتهى
Can you wrap up,
الوقت؟
Dr. Osama?
شكرا.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Osama. We're going to move now to the Q&A questions, and I'm sure that there will be quite a few questions coming in, but maybe I could address to both of you the question that's on my mind. You know, when we talk about the Quran, we never talk about translation into other languages. We talk about interpretation. And I think it's the same issue. We cannot really translate into other languages, but we can interpret. And it's also partially an issue of regional dialects, vocabulary that has different meanings. How would you look upon the use of AI, for example, in trying to interpret some of the oral poetry that you are collecting, both in Morocco, but also in Saudi Arabia, for Miriam and also for Osama, if you would like to start, and then I will collect other questions for you. Dr. Osama, would you like to respond to the notion of interpreting rather than translating? And perhaps you can, there's a question that's already come in for you from
بالنسبة لي دكتورة كاتي،
yes, where can we
بالنسبة
find your
لي
book?
هناك فرق كبير بين التفسير وبين الترجمة. التفسير هو بمعنى أو بآخر هو تأويل لهذا الموروث، أو أخذ انطباع عن هذا الموروث الشعبي. أما الترجمة كما قلت أنها هي فن إبداعي يمكن من خلاله أن نبدع في ترجمة هذا الموروث الشعبي وليس تفسيره، لأن الترجمة لها قوانين، لها ضوابط، لها محددات تجعل المترجم أو الخبير الذي يريد ترجمة هذا الموروث يعني ملتزما بضوابط أساسية علمية تجعله لا يضيع هذا الموروث الشعبي في نظري.
Okay, I would like to answer a question regarding translating the oral poetry using AI tools. I don't think it would be effective because most translation tools have not been trained using the dialect. Most translation services are trained using the classical or standard Arabic. It will not be able to produce an adequate translation, I think, if you insert an oral text or a dialectal text. You will have to rely on either dictionary, which are also scarce. Dictionaries explaining dialects are also scarce. So we're talking about really a deep underrepresentation, even in translation services and dictionaries. So I think the task of translating oral texts and dialects will need the translator to be competent in those dialects, or either consult members of certain communities. That's how the translation, this is how to translate those dialects and oral texts, I think, just completely by just human effort, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess this is what I'm coming to, that literal translation often loses the meaning and the context. And in order to actually translate, I'm going to say /interpret, you need to involve the community in getting a full understanding of the meaning of all the words and the context as well. So it's not really straightforward at all. I'm just going to say we have a couple of excuse me, questions coming in. For Dr. Osama, can you give us a sense of where we can find this book about the Moroccan storytellers? This is one question that's come in, and I'm just waiting to see, I think Dr. Ryan.
دكتورة كاتي، هذا الكتاب لحسن حظي أنه قريب من النفذ. أنا الآن أبحث عن طبعة ثانية، إن شاء الله سأخبركم فيها قريبا إذا تيسر في هيئة من الهيئات.
Thank you. I'm just waiting to see if there are any other questions that come in. Otherwise, I might ask what I found particularly interesting, Miriam. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work songs, particularly in this oldest form of Arabic poetry, the work songs often which engage human beings with animals. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this oral poetry, which is actually a historical artifact.
When I researched this, yes, I found that this musical meter was very popular early on in the history, as we said, because of its simplicity and because it's rhythmic. It was perfect for synchronized work songs. I found one example of a song that was sung during the activity of drawing water from the well. This is one of the examples. I don't have the poem, but as you can tell, it was simple and rhythmic, so it was perfect. And other thing about Rajas, it's a very popular, actually, has been very popular to this day. This kind of poetry is very popular because it's easy to memorize, and that's how it survived for so long. And we still have examples. I wish I included examples because clearly you're interested in this oral poetry. Yes, it's the oldest and it still continues to be popular.
Yes, I mean, I certainly at the local level, I hear it quite often, but it's very difficult sometimes to translate. In fact, I'm just going to go to a question which came in during an earlier session, but I think it's very relevant today, from Jongdo Kim, thanking us for the presentation and saying, because this is coming from Korea, from a foreigner's perspective, translation seems a very daunting task. And he is suggesting that maybe publishing a translation dictionary for each language is most urgent, but I would imagine that that's also a very expensive undertaking. But what do you think about publishing dictionaries of dialects? Both Dr. Osama and Miriam.
Yes, I think it's an important step in preserving the oral dialects because we have learners like the person who asked, I think his name is Jungdo. We have Arabic language learners who are willing to learn the dialects, and the materials are very scarce. So I think a project like this is very necessary for preserving the dialects and also transmitting them to the communities today, because the dialects are actually, you can say that they are struggling in these communities. We don't use some dialects went extinct actually. So the dictionary would be necessary, not only for second language learners or learners of Arabic, but also for us, because we are losing our grip on those dialects. Yes, and the usage, yeah, we don't use them a lot.
Yes, there's another, it's a question, but it's almost a statement. I heard the term Hakawati used in Morocco. Of course, it's very popular in Northern Arabia. The Hakawati was extremely important in the days before radio and television, and still important. So these storytellers are important figures around the world. Most societies have storytellers, and people gather around them. The question is, do you think this role is beginning to vanish? And become less popular in the new kind of social media we have? Or do you think that the role of the storyteller will continue? Either Dr. Osama or Miriam, or even our earlier speakers?
Yeah, for the storytellers, I think for today, I think it's important.
بالنسبة بالنسبة لهذه القضية، في نظري أستاذ بروفيسور كاتي، أنه قضية موت الرواة طبعا كما قلت هو ذرء كبير للموروث الشعبي. طبعا بعض الجهود التي قام بها بعض الهيئات أو بعض البودكاستات اللي كانت مهمة جدا في تدوين بعض المرويات الشعبية. وهناك حتى كما قام به الدكتور ريان ميلوف عندما قام بمحاورة باريس في بودكاست كما رأينا البارحة، مثل استنطاق هذا الموروث الشعبي أو فيما تبقى من الحكواتين، هو إعادة النقاش أو إعادة تحيين هذه الذاكرة أو الاشتغال عليها، الذاكرة الجمعية، هذا الموروث الشعبي الذي يجب دائما أن نبحث فيه، أن ننقب فيه، أنه عندما تبحث فيه وتنقب فيه دائما تكتشف الجديد. وهذه هي الخاصية الأساسية التي نجدها في هذا الموروث الشعبي. كل شيء يدفعك إلى البحث عن شيء آخر، وهنا حلاوة هذا الموروث.
Thank you, Dr. Osama. A question now for Miriam. Are there any specific references to investigate strategies for translating Saudi folklore? Have you come up with a good strategy to solve potential challenges?
Yes, from my research, I came across the paper I referenced, which is by Al-Harbi in 2023. She had a rigorous system. She collected the proverbs from the local community, and then she tried to translate them. And after she translated them, she consulted a few native speakers of English, and then she came up with these three, I discussed the three strategies, which is the first one is dynamic equivalence, the second was paraphrase, and the third was cultural substitution. And I think neither of them is literalization. I think in the context of translation strategies, I think strategies that are source language oriented are successful, whereas literal translation, I don't think it's an effective strategy. So yeah, I recommend reading that paper that I referenced, because she used actual material, actual folklore genre, which is the Najdi proverbs. And yeah, I think the answer would be yes, these three, I think that she recommended.
Thank you. Maybe our last question that has come in before we close our session. The question from Reem Shelwi is, how much creativity is being taken in translation? And is there any limitation you face in translation poetry, for example? or either of you.
Yes, I think for creative translation, I think if you want to preserve and represent the source culture, I think it's best to avoid adaptation because it actually eliminates the cultural aspect and the cultural references in the original text. So I would not recommend using creative translation or adaptation if you have the goal of preserving the genre, preserving the cultural references. I think it would be smart to use other strategies other than adaptation.
I'm going to say thank you very much, Dr. Usama and Miriam, for a really engaging second session. We've
شكراً.
reached the end of our time. So I'm going to end the session and thank you very much for engaging with our audience and with the questions that have been sent to you today.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Professor Shati, for presiding over the session and the thoughtful reflection and moderation. I really appreciate your presence with us this evening, and I look forward to working with you again. And also, we look forward continuing our collaboration with everyone. Thank you again, and look forward.
دكتورة منيرة.
شكرا لك يا دكتور أسامة. مع السلامة.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina.